this one, I said, Mags, you've arrived. You're starting to theorize and look at theories, but this one is really interesting. One of the unresolved questions. I didn't resolve everything in all the questions in the findings. And one of the unresolved things I had was, how does it hang together? And remember, I'm working pre-Elon Musk. Twitter was still in there. It was running everything. Twitter started in 2006. So did YouTube. So did TeachMeet. And there was one other one that I can't think of now. Big things that all started together. And I said, how do you, I know it's held together by tweets, but is there any sort of substance in that? And then I found my lovely friend, Mr. Professor Mark Branovetter, and this thing called The Strength of Weak Ties. And it explained everything about how the TeachMeet universe works. The less control, the more it stayed together. He called it the strength of weak ties that form bridges in loose-knit networks, interpersonal networks of networked individuals. It comes from George Seaman. And then I discovered it went right back to my favorite person, Mr. Rogers of the diffusion. Like the really, really old theories were coming back here. And Granovetter's explanation of how the strength of weak ties hit me in the middle of the forehead, and I see that in NEARImeet groups and other groups I'm in. The two things you need to hold the weak ties together are an emotional intensity that you get when you're together, and then a sense of community that you can sustain with something like Twitter or emails when you're apart. So I loved that, and it's really the only theorizing. It's the only theorizing that I did. And just for the crack, I have 2 minutes to show you how one way it can work. This would fall apart now. This is all going to fall apart because Twitter is going to fall apart. But in the middle of that network of tweets is a man called Ian Stewart, friend of mine. And Ian put out a tweet one day. This tweet in the middle: will we have a TeachMeet at the Scottish Learning Festival in 2017? Anyone interested in coming along? And all of the tweets on the outside to each other and in and out to Ian. That is the sum total of the communication it took to get that TeachMeet running. And who do I see in the middle of it? Myself. So I'm looking at this Tags Explorer. I didn't do this. This is made by a man called Martin Hawksey. My friend John Johnson just put that. He said, I'm going to see what happened. And what are the, the connections from Ian's tweet out. But it's really, really good, strong proof of the strength of weak ties, being able to bring in, I think there were 40 of us in Glasgow that night. The last two then, a pracademic was a word I'd never heard of. And now I realize I've been one. I was a practitioner. Then I became a pracademic when I started to, run TeachMeets and also when I was in the PDST. And what's really important to me now is, yes, I'm happy to be a pracademic. I'm happy to know everything about everything that I've learned in the 7 years, but I want to be on the practitioner side of the fence. The greatest joy of handing in the PhD was being able to say, I'm going to be able to run a TeachMeet again. I had in my ethics said I will step back from actually running them. So I find the academic vibe very strong in NEARImeet. And oh yeah, thank you all for this one. I had one huge conundrum. We talk about qualitative and traditions in qualitative research. I decided to put myself into the interview pool because I was the most practiced person in the country about TeachMeet. So I asked my supervisor, Richard, to interview me. It is also part of the testing and piloting of the interview cycle. But it took me 3 years to be able to validate that. It's another, like Jane's question, I knew I was doing the right thing, but for the PhD, one of the corrections I had to do, very few corrections, but one of them was, can you validate that bit about putting yourself into the interview schedule there, Mags, a little bit more? And it took me a long time. And there's only, it was one of my contributions to IPA is that there's only one paper about doing what's called a bracketing interview, and very little about using it. But I found and it was the thought of this group that, you know, makes me mishnock that, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I mean, I said, do I have to take myself out? But I went on with it, and not only did I do it, but it's seen as a contribution to the practice of IPA. So I'm really thrilled with that. And that's something I'm just going to leave there, but it's an extract from one of the interviews. It stopped me up. It almost made me cry, because I thought I'd be talking to people about practice. You know, how do you do the teach meet, and how do you make it, you know, run, and how does it go for you? But this one talks about it all being from the heart. It's from one teacher's heart to another. And again, I find that in the NEARImeet group a lot of the time when I listen and go back to my first times to go down with Ruth Sullivan and Colette Saunders in Limerick that time. And so it says there, interview, Connor, I will out him. That's Conor Galvin. That's from Conor's interview. And it's a measure of the man, and it's a measure of the teach meet. And it was Conor who brought Teach Me to Ireland with me. And Shin, the thesis is up in Tara in Trinity. But again, today it's much more important to talk about the NEARImeet dividend. I think that's really, it's unquantifiable, but I've done my little bit of quantification, and that's just half what I could have put in. So thank you all. I'll let Bernadette.
Thank you so much, Mag. Wonderful, really great insight there into the teach meets. So what we might ask everyone to do is to maybe pop a question in the chat or raise your hand if you have any questions for Mags on her studies. We'd love to hear from you if you would like to contribute over the next few minutes. We've got a few minutes for some feedback, comments, or questions. Where are we? Oh, Mary.
Hi there. It's not a question. It's just an, oh my God, that was amazing, Mags.
Oh, Mary. Hiya.
It was touching and powerful on so many levels, and the sense of the passion in it, the sense of, I don't know, the degree of theorization in it. I was absolutely riveted, and I would love to read the whole document.
It's all yours.
I just really appreciate the generosity of the way in which you've shared that and exposed the vulnerabilities that we all have felt as we've gone along the PhD route, because it's a tough one. And being like yourself, a science teacher by background, that tug of the positivistic is always with you. And funny, I had a very similar experience in that my supervisor made me at that time take every draft chapter I was working on to a Cairn conference to find a community of critical friends, was how he put it. And like that, it was kind of my thinking space. But I'm really taken here with the whole notion of these open spaces and the whole notion. I've been to a couple of teach meets and found them very interesting, but never, have really explored it in that depth. This was when I was working in England. But, this strength of weak ties, I find that a very, very powerful notion. And I'm just wondering how we can use this type of concept more as academics. Those of us who are lucky enough to have kind of escaped the formal structures of academia, I suppose, have a little bit more flexibility and more freedom, and we're not always just so trammeled by, the processes and the policies and the various other things that happen to you sometimes in academia. But it's just made me think so much how we can reconceptualize some of the ways in which we work together and develop that. Just, Mags, it was wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. But you put your finger on the dilemma, though, of when people see it in action and experience it and feel the power of it. It is rather wonderful. But the minute you try to corral it, it loses that. So there are a lot of officialdom organizations who'd love to use it, but I don't know if it's the right way to go, because there's absolutely no, there's no validity or reliability in it. There's no metrics you can, and it's not fair to expect it to do what professional development might do. And there's one other area I'd say that I should have shouted out in all of this. I wouldn't have got through any of these things without the two most trusting supervisors on the planet, Keith Johnston and Richard Millwood. I mean, they literally let me go in. I was in my third year before I had questions or methodologies. I know I was part-time, but it became the thing it became because of that, because I let it flow organically. And great to talk to another science teacher who escaped.
Yeah, and actually I think we've really
Positive
parallel experiences. I also had a very trusting supervisor who let me have at it. And it was a very organic experience and a very powerful one. And I don't mean kind of hijack this to use, but I'm just wondering how we can't be more like this in our work with each other.
Yeah, well, the key
Just
thing
something
is
to think about.
Yeah, get the principles of it and inject those into everything you're doing. That's key. And there's Carl Simmons runs TeachMeet every single year in his teacher training unit in Edge Hill University, and he emailed me one day 5 years ago and said, thinking of running a TeachMeet with the staff here, what'll I do? And I just said, build it and they will come. That's it. Don't make it. Don't make
I know, Carl. That's where I worked.
You see, that's it. So thanks,
Anyway,
Mary.
I'm going to shut up.
Thank you so much, Mags. I think we'll have to move on if that's okay. We're running out of time.